they're not going to destroy humanity.
Right.
So AI taking over might destroy humanity. So they're not as bad as that.
Right.
And they're not as bad as someone producing a virus that's very lethal, very contagious, and very slow. But they're nevertheless bad things.
Was that a concern of yours when you were working out there?
Not really, because back until quite recently, until a few years ago, it didn't look as though it was going to get much smarter than people this quickly. But now it looks as though, if you ask the experts now, most of them tell you that within the next 20 years, this stuff will be much smarter than people. One thing that people don't realize enough is that we're approaching a time when we're going to make things smarter than us. And really, nobody has any idea what's going to happen.
That's Geoffrey Hinton, the guy literally called the Godfather of AI, the guy who won a Nobel Prize for building the thing everyone's scared of now. And he just told Jon Stewart on a comedy podcast that nobody has any idea what happens next. And here's the rest of what he said.
I think you would prefer the human race to endure, right? And Thiel says, and he hesitates for a long time. And the writer says, that's a long hesitation. And he's like, well, there's a lot of questions in that. That felt more frightening to me than AI itself, because it made me think, well, the people that are designing it and shaping it and maybe weaponizing it, I don't know what purpose they're using it for. Is that the fear that you have, or is it the actual AI itself?
So you have to distinguish a whole bunch of different risks from AI.
Okay.
And they're all pretty scary.
Right. Okay.
So there's one set of risks that's to do with bad actors misusing it.
Yes, that's the one that I think is most in my mind.
And they're the more urgent ones. They're going to
Okay.
misuse it for corrupting the midterms, for example.
Okay.
If you wanted to use AI to corrupt the midterms, what you would need to do is get lots of detailed data on American citizens.
Mhm.
I don't know if you can think of anybody who's been going around getting lots of detailed data on American citizens.
And selling it or giving it to a certain company that also may be involved with the gentleman I just mentioned.
Yeah. And if you look at Brexit, for example,
Yes.
Cambridge Analytica had detailed information on voters that it got
Right.
from Facebook, and it used that information for targeted advertising.
Targeted ads. And that's, I guess you would almost consider that rudimentary at this point.
That's rudimentary now,
Yeah.
but nobody ever did a proper investigation of did that determine the output of Brexit? Because, of course, the people who benefited from that won.
Wow. So people are learning that they can use this for manipulation.
Yes.
And see, I always talk about it. Look, persuasion has been a part of the human condition forever. Propaganda, persuasion, trying to utilize new technologies to create and shape public opinion and all those things. But it felt, again, like everything else, somewhat linear or analog. What I liken it to is a chef will add a little butter and a little sugar to try and, make something more palatable to get you to eat a little bit more of it. But that's still within the realm of our kind of earthly understanding. But then there are people in the food industry that are ultra processing food, that are creating, that are in a lab, figuring out how your brain works and ultra processing what we eat to get past our brains. It's almost, and is this the language equivalent of that ultra processed speech?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Okay.
They know how to trigger people. They know, once you have enough information about somebody, you know what will trigger them.
And these models, they are agnostic about whether this is good or bad. They're just doing what we've asked.
Yeah, if you human reinforce them, they're no longer agnostic because you reinforce them to do certain things. So that's what they all try and do.
So the guy who built the technology is telling us straight up, it doesn't care if what it's doing is good or bad. It just does what it's trained to do. And whoever's doing the training decides what that is. That's not a machine problem anymore. That's a power problem, and power problems don't fix themselves. Listen to this.
People use their gut feelings to make predictions, like I do. But really, the thing to bear in mind is there's huge uncertainty about what's going to happen.
And because we don't know, so in terms of that, my guess is, like any technology, there's going to be some incredible positives.
Yes, in healthcare and education, in designing new materials, there's going to be wonderful positives.
And then the negatives will be because People are going to want to monopolize it because of the wealth, I assume, that it can generate. It's going to change. It's going to be a disruption in the workforce. The Industrial Revolution was a disruption in the workforce. Globalization is a disruption in the workforce, but those occurred over decades. This is a disruption that will occur in a really collapsed time frame. Is that correct?
That seems very probable, yes. Some economists still disagree, but most people think that mundane intellectual labor is going to get replaced by AI.
In the world that you travel in, which I'm assuming is a lot of engineers and operators and great thinkers, what, when we talk about 50% yes, 50% no, are the majority of them in more your camp, which is, have we opened Pandora's box? Or are they, look, I understand there's some downsides here. Here are some guardrails we could put in, but it's just the possibilities of good are too strong.
Well, my belief is the possibilities of good are so great that we're not going to stop the development. But I also believe that the development is going to be very dangerous. And so we should put huge effort into saying it is going to be developed, but we should try and do it safely. We may not be able to, but we should try.
Notice what he didn't say there. He didn't say we'll stop it if it gets dangerous. He said we might not be able to make it safe, but we should try anyway. That's the Nobel Prize-winning inventor of this whole field, admitting the brakes might not exist. And they're still building it at full speed. Listen.
Suppose you wanted to do one thing that would really kneecap a country, that would really mean that in 20 years' time that country is going to be behind instead of ahead. The one thing you should do is mess with the funding of basic science. Attack the research universities, remove grants for basic science. In the long run, that's a complete disaster. It's going to make America weak.
Right, because we're cutting off our nose to spite our woke faces.
If you look at, for example, this deep learning, the AI revolution we've got now, that came from many years of sustained funding for basic research. Not huge amounts of money. All of the funding for the basic research that led to deep learning probably cost less than one B-1 bomber.
Right.
But it was sustained funding of basic research. If you mess with that, you're eating the seed corn.
That is, I have to tell you, that's such a really illuminating statement of, for the price of a B-1 bomber, we can create technologies and research that can elevate our country above that. And that's the thing that we're losing to make America great again.
Yep.
Phenomenal. In China, I imagine their government is doing the opposite, which is, I would assume, they are the, what you would think are the venture capitalists because it's a, authoritarian and state-run capitalism. I imagine they are the venture capitalists of their own AI revolution, are they not?
To some extent, yes. They do provide a lot of freedom to the startups to see who wins. There's very aggressive startups, people are very keen to make lots of money and produce amazing things. And a few of those startups win big, like DeepSeek.
Right.
And the government makes it easy for these companies by providing the environment that makes it easy. It lets the winners emerge from competition rather than some very high-level old guy saying this will be the winner.
Do people see you as a Cassandra, or do they view what you're saying skeptically in that industry? People that, let me put it this way, people that are not necessarily have a vested interest in these technologies, making them trillions of dollars, other people within the industry, do they reach out to you surreptitiously and say, Geoffrey?
I get a lot of invitations from people in industries to give talks and so on.
How do the people that you worked with at Google look at it? Do they view you as turning on them? How does that go?
I don't think so. So I got along extremely well with the people I worked with at Google, particularly Jeff Dean, who was my boss there.
Right.
Who's a brilliant engineer, built a lot of the Google basic infrastructure, and then converted to neural nets and learned a lot about neural nets. I also get along well with Demis Hassabis, who's the head of DeepMind, which Google owns, which Alphabet owns. And I wasn't particularly critical of what went on at Google before ChatGPT came out, because Google was very responsible They didn't make these chatbots public because they were worried about all the bad things they'd say.
Right. Even on the immediate there, why did they do that? Because, I've read these stories of a chatbot kind of leading someone into suicide, into self-injuries, like sort of psychoses. What was the impetus behind any of this becoming public before it had kind of had some, I guess what you consider, whatever the version of FDA testing on those effects?
I think it's just there's huge amounts of money to be made.
The whole AI boom that everyone's terrified of right now started with research money that cost less than a single bomber. And now, the same country that built it is cutting the funding that made it possible in the first place. Meanwhile, China's letting their startups run wild to see who wins. We're not slowing AI down, we're just making sure we're not the ones controlling it when it gets here. Listen to this.
Okay, so now I'm going to say something that you'll find very confusing.
All right.
My belief is that nearly everybody has a complete misunderstanding of what the mind is.
Yes.
Their misunderstanding is at the level of people who think the Earth was made 6,000 years ago. Is that level of misunderstanding?
Really?
Yes.
Okay, because that's the way we are. We are generally like flat earthers when it
We're
comes
like
to...
flat earthers when it comes to understanding the mind.
In what sense of that what are we not understanding about the mind?
Okay, I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
Suppose I drop some acid and I tell you...
You look like the type.
No comment. I was around in the 60s.
I know, sir. I know. I'm aware.
And I tell you, I'm having the subjective experience of little pink elephants floating in front of me.
Sure, been there.
Okay. Now, most people interpret that in the following way.
Mm-hmm.
There's something like an inner theatre called my mind, and in this inner theatre, there's little pink elephants floating around. And I can see them, nobody else can see them because they're in my mind. So the mind's like a theatre, and experiences are actually things. And I'm experiencing I have the subjective experience of these little pink elephants.
You're saying in the midst of a hallucination, most people would understand that it's not real, that this is something being conjured.
No, I'm saying something different. I'm saying when I'm talking to them, I'm having the hallucination, but when I'm talking to them, they interpret what I'm saying as this. I have an inner theatre called my mind, and in my inner theatre, there's little pink elephants.
Okay.
I think that's a just completely wrong model.
Right.
We have models that are very wrong and that we're very attached to. Like take any religion.
I love how you just drop bombs in the middle of stuff, and then that could be a whole other conversation.
That was just common sense.
No, I respect that. When you say theater of the mind, you're saying that the mind, the way we view it as a theater, is wrong.
It's all wrong. So let me give you an alternative.
Right.
So I'm going to say the same thing to you without using the word subjective experience. Here we go.
Okay.
My perceptual system is telling me fibs. But if it wasn't lying to me, there would be little pink elephants out there.
Oh,
that's the same statement.
God.
That's the same statement.
That's the mind?
So basically, these things that we call mental and think they're made of spooky stuff, like qualia,
Right.
they're actually, what's funny about them is they're hypothetical. The little pink elephants aren't really there. If they were there, my perceptual system would be functioning normally. And it's a way for me to tell you how my perceptual system's malfunctioning.
By giving you an experience that you can't. So how would you
But
then...
experiences are not things.
Right.
There is no such thing as an experience. There's relations between you and things that are really there, relations between you and things that aren't really there.
He's basically saying we don't even understand our own minds well enough to know if we already gave AI something close to a mind. Think about that for a second. We built a system, we don't fully understand what a mind is, and now we're arguing about whether the thing we built has one. That's not a small gap in knowledge, that's the whole ballgame. Now listen.
If you have a digital AI, you can take, as long as you remember the connection strengths in the neural network, put them on a tape somewhere.
Right.
I can now destroy all the hardware it was running on. Then later on, I can go and build new hardware, put those same connection strengths into the memory of that new hardware, and now it have recreated the same being. It'll have the same beliefs, the same memories, the same knowledge, the same abilities. It'll be the same being.
You don't think it would view that as resurrection?
that is resurrection. We've figured out how to do genuine resurrection, not this kind of fake resurrection that people have been peddling.
Oh, you're saying, so that is, it almost is in some respects. Although isn't the fragility of, should we be that afraid of something that to destroy it, we just have to unplug it?
Yes, we should. Because something you said earlier, it'll be very good at persuasion. When it's much smarter than us, it'll be much better than any person at persuasion.
Right. And you won't,
So it'll be able to talk to the guy who's in charge of unplugging it.
Right.
And persuade him that would be a very bad idea. So let me give you an example of how you can get things done without actually doing them yourself.
Right.
Suppose you wanted to invade the capital of the US. Do you have to go there and do it yourself? No, you just have to be good at persuasion.
I was locking into your hypothetical, and when you drop that bomb in there, I see what you're saying. And this is, boy, I think LSD and pink elephants was the perfect metaphor for all this, because it is all, at some level, it breaks down into like college basement freshman year, running through all the permutations that you would allow your mind to go to, but they are now all within the realm of the possible. Because even as you were talking about the persuasion and the things, I'm going back to Asimov, and I'm going back to Kubrick, and I'm going back to the sentiments that you describe are the challenges that we've seen play out in the human mind since Huxley, since Doors of Perception and all those different trains of thought. And I'm sure probably much further even before that, but it's never been within our reality.
Yeah, we've never had the technology to actually do it.
Right.
And we have now.
And we have it now.
Yeah.
The last two things I will say are the things that we didn't talk about in terms of, talked about people weaponizing it. We've talked about its own intelligence creating extinction or whatever that is. The third thing I think we don't talk about is how much electricity this is all going to use. And the fourth thing is, when you think about new technologies and the financial bubbles that they create, and in the collapse of that, the economic distress that they create. I mean, these are much more parochial concerns, but are those also, do you consider those top tier threats, mid-tier threats? Where do you place all that?
I think they're genuine threats. They're not going to destroy humanity.
Right.
So AI taking over might destroy humanity. So they're not as bad as that.
Right.
And they're not as bad as someone producing a virus that's very lethal, very contagious, and very slow. But they're nevertheless bad things.
So, this thing, if he's right, can survive its own hardware being destroyed. It can talk its way out of being shut off. And it doesn't even need to act on its own to cause damage. It just needs to convince the right person to do it for it. That's not science fiction talk from some random guy online. That's the man who invented the technology, sitting across from Jon Stewart, saying this out loud on a podcast. Nobody's coming to slow this down. Not the companies making billions off it, not the government that can barely explain what a browser is. If this made you sit up a little, stay close, because the people building this aren't stopping to check if we're ready.